Ni hao, and welcome to the Chinese century, where the glorious Middle Kingdom finally takes its place as a global superpower. They dominate world trade, electric cars, high-speed rail, AI, video games. Hell, they dominate half the things in the room with you right now. Xi dominates you, and you love it, is what I would say if this dude wasn't a massive fraud. If you watch most videos on the rise of China, tell me if this sounds familiar. Leader is stupid. New leader decides to not be stupid, except for that one time, and opens China for business. Country slowly starts to develop under his protege, then skip a few, and suddenly China's the most powerful country on earth, ruled by a new dictator. Huh? What happened at the most important part? And while Xi gets all the credit, much of his success was actually gifted to him by the man he's tried to erase. The former leader of China you never hear about. Who is this mysterious man? Yes, he is. That'll make sense in a second. But first we have to start at the start of Hu Jintao. Hu Jintao was born in China in 1942. He attended and worked at China's most prestigious university, where he decided to join the Chinese Communist Party, just in time for the Cultural Revolution, which got his father denounced and jailed, and him exiled to the desert. For some reason, this didn't radicalize him into a Johnny Silverhand-style terrorist, and actually made him more inspired to rise the ranks of power. Throw me to the desert, I'll just grind harder. Eventually, some college buddies got him hired in Beijing, but the senior leaders wanted to toughen him up, like your dad after a few beers. So they sent him to run a dirt-poor rural province where he surprisingly excelled and more than doubled their economy. Having proven himself, he was sent to lead the peaceful land of Tibet, where on his very first day, police gunned down protesters in the streets. On International Human Rights Day, by the way. He'd ruled Tibet with an iron fist, earning the respect of senior leaders. Yet Tibet was far from the capital, where the real power was. Lucky for Hu, he got altitude sickness and had to return to Beijing, where he immediately entrenched himself in the national government. What a stroke of luck. Soon he was a member of the Politburo and made vice president. After the US accidentally blew up China's embassy during the bombing of Yugoslavia, which they were pissed about, I guess, weird, Hu gave China's televised response. He called the incident criminal and barbaric, but warned people against overreactions. This showed off his leadership skills and made him popular to the Chinese people. By 2002, it was decided that Hu would become General Secretary and President, giving him complete power over China. He was the best candidate, intelligent, loyal, and most of all, kind of boring. His rise went basically unnoticed, just keeping his head down and doing his work, meaning the world didn't know what to expect from Mr. Mystery. But the people of China were optimistic. With his second in charge, Wen Jiabao, he created the Hu-Wen administration, a coalition with a name almost as funny as the Mai Dong administration. But they immediately ran into problems. China was developing, but it was in a bad spot. Not all sunshine and rainbows, quite literally. Back in Mao's day, everyone was equal. Equally poor, starving, and dying, that is. Deng and Jiang sort of fixed it with, you know, an actual economy, but now there was a class divide. A divide that was only growing. The internet was on the rise, giving voices to people the government would really like to shut up. The US had just invaded a country directly on their border, kinda. And to say pollution destroyed the environment would be the understatement of the new century. Addressing any of this wouldn't be easy either. The now former leader, Jiang Zemin, didn't want to give up all his power, so he remained head of the military until 2004. Plus, his friends still held many positions of power, making Hu's first years extremely difficult. And almost immediately, he faced a whole new, yet very familiar challenge, the virus. His first crisis would be the SARS outbreak, the cousin of the virus that I'm still too afraid to mention on YouTube. The health minister and Beijing's mayor both tried to cover it up, yet it was still contained, kinda. And Hu fired both of them in a popular show of force. Disaster narrowly avoided, unlike his successor, but we'll get to him. Throughout his administration, Hu made it a point to close the class divide. Rapid growth had mostly been in the rich coastal cities, meaning inland cities and rural areas were being left behind, while coastal cities had so much industry, going outside was the equivalent of smoking a full pack of Newports. Ah, Newports. Hu moved away from this unbalanced growth to create his harmonious society by investing in rural areas and helping inland cities catch up. The environment was also a major priority, something he'd battle with his entire time in office. Hu didn't run China like a traditional dictator with vain propaganda and fiery speeches. He ran it like a CEO, calculated, quiet, and bland, which is exactly what they needed to slip under the radar. You see, Hu was the first to benefit from China's most important resource, the US constantly shooting itself in the foot. For the past half-century, the US was focused on combating communism and staying a superpower, meaning China was often under their Eye of Sauron. But after the Two Towers, America's focus was squarely on the War on Terror. Smartly, Hu just left the US to its devices and took advantage of their distraction. Turns out Americans were worried about the wrong Chinese man with the rockets. He greatly increased China's military power, invested heavily in a new navy, and was the first leader to really get aggressive in claiming the South China Sea. But Hu loved a bit of soft power as well. He created the good neighbor policy, focused on improving ties with close countries. He sneakily built strategic ports around the world, setting the nation up for global power. He even tried to improve relations with Taiwan and get North Korea to get rid of its nukes, neither of which really worked, but as they say in international politics, it's the thought that counts. Whereas previous leaders tried to cozy up to the West, Hu made, as the kids say, money moves in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and especially Africa. In 2007, Hu took an 8-nation tour through Africa, negotiating billions in trade deals and loans. China built Africa new energy projects, factories, roads, railways, and more, gaining them important natural resources in return. Soon, China became the continent's largest trading partner, laying the groundwork for their now famous Belt and Road Initiative, another thing a certain honey-loving honcho has taken credit for. Hu moved in silence, but he was moving the economy, increasing military power, and setting up alliances that would set China's course for decades. He had put China in the perfect position. It was finally time for their coming out party. One single event that would encapsulate everything China had become. The 2008 Beijing Olympics. The Beijing Games were set to be held in August, smack dab in the middle of the global financial crisis. While other countries struggled through the recession, another example of the US shooting itself in the foot, Hu managed to keep the economy thriving with some stimmies. Hell, China was on track for a 280 billion trade surplus. It was the perfect opportunity to flaunt the Chinese miracle. Hu spent 43 billion on the games, the most ever at that point. Everything had to be perfect. Olympic facilities were built in 7 different cities. The country's first high-speed rail was opened in preparation. The games were scheduled to start at 8:08 on the 8th day of the 8th month of 2008, since 8 is a lucky number in China, with the slogan, "One World, One Dream." A very fitting title for the one-party state. But there would be problems. Journalists worried about China's infamous suppression of free press. Beijing had some of the worst air quality in the world. And to top it all off, protest over Tibet had reignited. The torch relay was the longest in history, though the journey of harmony would be anything but. Pro-Tibet protests were held all along the route, with fights breaking out as they tried to extinguish the flame. Though this did basically nothing, China did promise free press and clean air. Hu was determined to make the sky blue for the games, which is such a funny goal to have. It's such a low bar. Hundreds of factories were shut down for the games, and millions of cars were prevented from driving on certain days. By the time of the games, air quality in the city had improved dramatically. It was finally time. It all kicked off with the important opening ceremony, which to this day is considered the greatest of all time. And they were totally right. I mean, this was insane. They had this puppet battle in the middle of it. They had these guys going crazy. I could feel myself being indoctrinated. And the games would only get better. The bike race followed the Great Wall. Michael Phelps broke the record for the most golds at a single Olympics, or ever actually. Usain Bolt was crowned fastest man alive, smashing 2 world records. The stadiums, known as the Bird's Nest and the Water Cube, were praised for more than just their silly names. Not to say there weren't problems. Reporters still found many websites blocked, and a few of them were even been beaten and arrested. And they may not have been that truthful with the air quality, as the stadium was still covered in smog. It was so bad that world record-holding runner Haile Gebrselassie had to pull out of the marathon due to his asthma. Absolutely insane the world record holder had asthma, by the way. I mean, one of the goats of all goats, if you think about it. When it was all said and done, China won the most golds by a lot. The games were a massive success, and Hu had brought China onto the world stage. From there, everything was coming up Hu. His investments in other countries began paying off. Trade with Latin America grew 1,200% and grew six-fold with Africa. They even built and entirely funded the new African Union headquarters as a gift. Beijing had announced that they wanted to double the GDP between 2000 and 2010. Yet in that time, despite the financial crisis, the economy grew over 270%. Per capita income rose over 2.5 times. By the time he left office, air pollution was down, and the country boasted over 7,000 miles of high-speed rail. Inequality between provinces sharply dropped, achieving one of his goals. He'd accelerated China's space program. Shanghai hosted the World Expo in 2010 with record attendance, solidifying its re-emergence as a key global city. China's GDP was now second only to the US. Now, I know I've been talking this guy up like I want to bring him back to my place, but before you get your Hu Jintao body pillow, let me remind you, he was still a very repressive dictator. He jailed famous artists and a future Nobel Peace Prize winner for stepping a little too far out of line. The infamous Great Firewall really got its footing under Hu. During the rise of iPhones and YouTube, Hu kept the West out of China, looking to purify their socialist internet. Though it didn't usually feature him, propaganda was still a big part of everyday life. Not to mention, he continued the disastrous one-child policy, and oh yeah, that African Union building I mentioned, it turns out it was filled with listening devices, go figure. But you gotta give the devil his due. He turned a still-building China into a global superpower during rapidly changing times. Hu's reign is now considered a more open and prosperous time of China's history, though that's not how people saw it at the time. When Hu's second term was up, he was not very popular. Every major Chinese leader, Mao, Deng, Zhang, and eventually Xi, were given the title core leader. Hu never was. He was seen as weak and stagnant. Many elites had criticized his inaction, openly calling it a lost decade. Despite his work, China was just growing too fast to close the class divide. The environment was still a major issue, arguably worse in some areas. His good neighbor policy was kind of undercut by his increased militarization and border issues, and most notably, corruption thrived. But what about all his accomplishments? I mean, the charts back him up. Well, unfortunately for Hu, he could never shake the most noticeable thing about him. He was unnoticeable. Despite China's massive rise under him, he wasn't really the face of China. Propaganda rarely featured him. He had no manifestos. His slogans and ideas didn't really catch on. Even him stepping down was overshadowed by the death of bombastic leader Hugo Chavez, with Hu's exit being described as composed, orderly, and dull as the man himself. Ouch. And just like that, Hu made way for China's new leader, his far more charismatic vice president, Xi Jinping. Now, Xi needs no introduction. There's a million videos on him about what he's done for China, yada yada. Yet most of what he has was built by Hu Jintao. China's booming economy and trade, saved by Hu. China's powerful navy and stance in the South China Sea, thank Captain Hu. The entire foundation of the Belt and Road Initiative, the crown jewel of Xi's reign, all laid out by Hu. The difference, Xi isn't quiet about his moves. Due to the corruption that had grown under Hu, Xi was able to remove anyone not loyal to him under the guise of anti-corruption. Many were Hu's former allies, and he'd use Hu to solidify his power. During an important political meeting, two men walked up to Hu, who aged terribly by the way, and seemingly forced him to leave. Hu tried to resist at first, and appeared to say something to Xi, who only gave him a cold nod back. And just like that, Hu was removed from the meeting. A clear statement that Xi was in charge now. And where is he now? Who knows? But really, nobody seems to know where he went. His role completely faded from history. This is my most researched video by far because you straight up can't find any info on this guy anymore. Xi has used the old Olympic slogan as his own. Xi even had his own Beijing Olympics, reusing some of the buildings that Hu's administration built. You remember those old Mario and Sonic Olympic games? They started making those at the 2008 Olympics. Can you guess when they stopped? The 2022 Olympics. He's erased everything. The Hu Wen administration lived lived up to its name, because nobody remembers who they were or when they were in power. But I think that's also due to us just wanting a better story for China with a more interesting main character, who was just too boring for his own good. But Hu Jintao oversaw the true rise of China and guided it through many obstacles that could have thrown it off course at its most important time. A major pandemic, a financial disaster, a split society, Olympic embarrassment, American interference. He turned a rising economy into a superpower in under a decade. I think he should get more credit for getting China to where it is today, whether that's for better or worse. Unless he's in a work camp right now, in which case he was a traitor to our glorious leader. Long live the Chinese century by Huawei. I'm gonna do my Chinese impression now. Here we go.